Klonoa was one of those games where I saw it in passing at some store, or saw some art of it somewhere online and thought it looked cool. I didn't pick it up right away, but always kept it in the back of my mind. I think a lot of people can relate to this experience. Like sometimes you'll listen to a song you really like from a band you never heard of before. Even though you really like the song, you might not go through the rest of the album it's from, let alone find out more about the band and the other things they may have made. But it will always be there if you decide to go back and give their other stuff a listen. Klonoa's design really stuck out to me the first time I saw it. I don't remember which design it was, but I thought it was great. I really like how he's got this cute and cool thing going on. His long ears give him a great silhouette, and I'm a sucker for cartoony shoes and gloves. In a developer interview for Klonoa 2, designer Tsuyoshi Kobayashi said that they heard that Klonoa's design in the first game was too busy. I think the design here is great, but I can totally see where they're coming from. There's a lot of different colors going on here that aren't super necessary. Like they all work, they all complement each other to some degree, but it's a little much. Klonoa's design in 2, which is my favorite, simplifies the design while also maintaining that cute/cool balance. Klonoa's outfit is only 2 colors, matching his iconic blue and yellow Pac-Man hat, and they changed his shoes from brown to red. This is great for a platforming character since you can easily see where your character's feet are, which makes landing on platforms a little less daunting. It's cool to see a design choice on a character actually being utilized in the gameplay. It reminds me how in Gravity Rush, Cat's design looks really stylish with this scarf, but it also shows your relative position to the ground by having the scarf affected by gravity. It's also great to see they cured Klonoa of his jaundice, poor bastard. Klonoa, that is the game itself, was inspired by the idea of dreams being forgotten when you wake up. The world of Phantom Isle is created by the energy of these lost dreams. Dreams are a central theme to this game, being an important aspect of the story. The first Klonoa game I played was Door to Phantom Isle from the Fantasy Reverie series. The first time I played it, I didn't even finish the third vision because the completionist in me wanted to get every gem in a level before moving on to the next one. I had to put it down because of this, because I was constantly seeing the same levels over and over again. When I went back to it, I decided I wanted to go through the levels more casually, and then go back for the missed collectibles after I beat the game. But nah, I didn't do that. I still went for every gem before moving on like I was fucking Adam Sandler. That being said, I did end up getting to the end of the game and I enjoyed it. Afterwards, I decided to check out the original for PlayStation, and I have to say, I think I prefer this version. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm mainly gonna talk about the PlayStation version, but I'll also be talking about the differences between this version and the new one. The game starts with a cutscene of a dream Klonoa had. It's definitely a product of its time. It looks great though. I love these early 3D cutscenes. Like, yeah, they may seem a little barbaric by today's standards, but I think they're still charming, especially during the PlayStation era. I think it fits Klonoa especially well. Sometimes cutscenes like this in early 3D games feel like the developer's showing off. Klonoa doesn't need to have like overly rendered realistic fur or some stupid shit like that. He just needs to look like a polished version of himself. Another example would be Final Fantasy VII's CGI cutscenes. They might not have the most amazing animations, but I still think the models look cool. Whenever I saw cutscenes like this as a kid, I viewed them as a kind of treat. If something like this showed up, I knew something big was gonna happen. Technology has really advanced since this era of gaming. Nowadays, the actual gameplay looks better than the cutscenes of yesterday, so I can only imagine that making the cutscenes stand out from the gameplay takes some serious work. I think because of this, I have a stronger appreciation for these older scenes. Even playing Klonoa for the first time as a guy in his mid-20s, I still feel that excitement I had when I'd see stuff like this when I was younger. All this to say that this cutscene that introduces us to Klonoa and Hupo is great and I love it. We see a plane crash into an area known as Bell Hill, which reminds Klonoa of the dream he just had, so he and Hupo decide to go check it out. The first level gives us the first taste of how you can interact with the foreground and background. Klonoa's main feature is the ability to grab enemies with his wind bullet, and from there using it to double jump or throw it into other enemies or collectibles. There are 5 directions you can throw enemies. You can throw them left or right, down when you double jump, and into the foreground and background. Sometimes there will be eggs in the background you need to line yourself up with to be able to hit with an enemy. The ability to interact with the foreground and background might not seem like too big of a deal, but it's used for some fun puzzles. Sometimes you'll need to time your shots well to be able to hit a moving target, or grab an enemy that's coming at you from the background with the right timing. Enemies can also jump out of any direction, meaning you need to pay attention to not only what's on the same axis as you, but from obstacles that are being shown in the background. There are even times you can use an enemy to hit another enemy in the background, letting you clear an obstacle that'll show up when you eventually get to the area they were in. Some enemies have different abilities when you grab them. There aren't a whole bunch, but it varies up the gameplay enough. Klonoa has another ability, which is he can hover in the air for a bit for a short time like Yoshi. This can do a few things for you, such as giving you enough height to reach ledges you may have missed or collect gems that are just a little too out of reach. This level also shows us that there are places you can go that are off the beaten path. In this level, we can take a path that leads up to the windmill for an extra life, as well as some gems and a Phantomillion. This gives some extra depth and a sense of exploration to levels, making it so we're not just heading in one direction the whole time. Paired with the 3D perspective we're in, levels in this game feel feel really expansive. The way some paths will curve around a boulder or a giant gear makes it feel like we're really getting to know this place, like it's an actual location and not just a theme placed over a video game level. I briefly mentioned gems and Phantomillions. Those are the main collectibles in Klonoa. There are 6 Phantomillions in every level. Collecting every single one unlocks the extra vision after you beat the game. Phantomillions are usually trapped in bubbles or eggs you need to break. Finding these guys is fun enough. They usually require you to use your wind bullet in thought-provoking ways, like right after doing a double jump or jumping from a moving floor at the right time. They're not too hard to find either. They can sometimes be in rooms that are off to the side, so you do need to keep an eye out if you want to collect them all. The other main collectible in this game are gems. There are 150 gems in every level. Getting every one of them doesn't net you anything, it's just for clout. Getting every gem in a level isn't as easy it may seem, especially when it comes to the mirror spirits. Collecting a mirror spirit makes all gems worth double their amount for a short period of time. This makes for some really tough challenges if you plan on getting them all. The mirror spirit gems are easily the most difficult part about this game. You need to get all the gems in the short segment the mirror spirit is in if you want to get that sweet 150 out of 150 on the gem counter. These often require tight maneuvering and near perfect timing. Failing to get all the gems means either moving on or killing yourself in order to retry, so you need to decide if it's worth doing in that moment or to just suck it up and go back for it later. Getting these gems really tests how well you know the mechanics of this game, and it feels very rewarding to be able to nab every one of them. Almost all of this is shown in level 1, and it only gets expanded on further from this point. Last thing to mention about this first level is that we meet this guy named Baloo, who tells us about the songstress Lafize, who the statue outside depicts. She sings something called the Song of Rebirth, a song that brings Phantomile back to a renewed state. After this, we move on to the next stage. Vision 1-2 has even more optional pathways we can take compared to Vision 1-1. It's also notable that the mirror spirits are more of a puzzle element now. The first example of this occurs right away when we go underneath the path we start out on. The goal here is to grab all the gems while the spirit is active, except this time you need to do this in a way that gets as many gems as possible with as few jumps as possible. The last mirror spirit had us more or less run in a line, but now we gotta actually think a little. In the same stage, there's another mirror spirit that actually took me a second to understand the first time I came across it. After getting past this giant moo, which are the enemies in this game, you can find this area here. I thought that the way to solve it was to grab the shield moo, jump over these gems, double jump, and then quickly grab the flying enemy and use it to jump through the gap to get the mirror spirit. From there, I thought I was supposed to let the flying enemy respawn, grab the mirror spirit, and then use the enemy to grab the high up gems and clean up the rest. Suffice to say that I tried it and it never worked. Turns out I was overcomplicating things way too much. I didn't know this at the time, but I eventually found out you can burst bubbles with thrown enemies, not just your wind bullet. So all I had to do was this. My overthinking aside, I think it's great to have a collectible in a game where you have to do more than just seek them out and pick them up, but also be tested on your skill with the game's mechanics. I definitely felt more of a rewarding feeling getting all 150 gems in a Vision than I did, say, getting all 3 star coins in a Mario level. In those games, it's about noticing your surroundings and bringing the right power up for the job, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like having these collectibles be more of a skill check is a way more gratifying and fun experience. With that being said, I want to talk about the first differences between the OG Door-to Phantomile and the Fantasy Reverie series version. In the new version, every time you complete a vision, you're brought to the map screen to select the next level you want to play. In the OG, completing a level brings you straight into the next one. No map screen. So if this is the first Klonoa game you decide to play, you won't even know that the gems are a collectible. Like a completionist collectible, I mean. Personally, I think it's better this way. I said before that I really busted my balls over collecting all 150 gems in a level before moving on to the next one when I first played. This is obviously on me, but in the original version, there's a better flow to the game as a whole that makes it a more relaxing experience. I felt more immersed in the game and its story since there's no stopping in between visions. If I miss some gems, it's whatever, because when you unlock the level select at the end of the game, the counters are all at 0 no matter how many gems you collected the first time around. Meaning if you want that 100% swag, you're gonna have to replay all the levels anyway. Admittedly, having the map screen right away from the get-go probably would have been a better idea after everything's said and done. Not being able to replay levels means you can't go back and grind for lives if you're having trouble somewhere, meaning you'll have to replay entire stages if you die enough times, which can be pretty frustrating since some of the later levels can be quite lengthy. Now I'm a grown-ass man who's been playing games like this for as long as I've been able to remember, so I didn't ever get a game over in this playthrough. This game isn't terribly hard or anything, there's some tight jumps and some grabs you have to time well, and I already talked about the mirror spirits. I think the best way to play any version of this game is to play it through casually, and then go back for any collectibles you may have missed. Back to the actual game, we encounter our antagonist antagonists of the game. Our bad guys are this guy Gadius and his little buddy Joka. Gadius doesn't want Lafize, who is the one who crashed into Bell Hill, to sing her song to renew the world, as without it, Phantom Isle will be plunged into darkness and be destroyed. After failing to find a pendant on her, Gadius takes Lafize and leaves Joka to deal with Klonoa. This initiates the first boss battle of the game. Rongo Longo is a pretty standard case for a first boss. Joka flat out tells you that his tail is his weak point. The objective is to throw enemies at his backside until he dies. He'll jump up in the air and you need to run underneath him before he lands in order to hit him at first though, since running at him will just cause him to turn around. He also has two other attacks. One is this rainbow ring and the other is this shockwave. Both are avoided by jumping over them. Yeah, pretty standard fare for a first boss. I do appreciate it not being as simple as just throwing an enemy at him, even if Joka does tell you his weak point. Having to hit him from the back gives this fight just enough to stick out to me. Even if he is pretty easy, Rongo Longo actually does feel like a fight and not just an object you have to damage in order to progress. After the boss, Joka runs and Klonoa and Hupo find the pendant that Lafize had. They take it to Klonoa's grandpa, who basically tells them that they're in deep shit. He tells us about the Moon Kingdom and to visit Forlock Forest's granny to learn more. He doesn't tell us why she's the one to go to. All we know is it has something to do with this Moon Kingdom. Forlock Forest is pretty much the second world. I've been going back and forth calling the stages in this game levels and visions. The latter is what they're referred to in-game. There's not a lot of visions in the main game, 12 if you don't count the final vision and Baloo's Tower. Each world, we'll call them, only has 2 levels. I think they use this numbering scheme for the visions to differentiate the world, but you can see the worlds on the map screen. Why am I spending so much time on this, you may ask? I just think that they could have numbered these visions 1 through 12 to make things simpler, that's all. Forlock Forest starts off really strong and maintains this strength through the entirety of the level. It has some more complex platforming and introduces us to keys. You can probably guess, but there are locked doors that we have to find the keys to in order to progress. They're never too much of a hassle to find. Usually if you run into a locked door, all you have to do is go down a path you passed before to find the key. This vision has some optional paths to find Phantomillions, but they're harder to come by. The training wheels have definitely come off. I actually missed one of the Phantomillions in this vision. What you have to do is grab the swinging monkey and jump onto the platform near where you first come in. You can see enemies and an exit along this path, so you know that it's an accessible area. There's even gems on the platform here to help you understand that you can in fact land on it. It may not be obvious at first since most of the optional paths in the previous visions were usually on the same axis as you, but here it changes the axis. I think that's what happened to me here. I thought that the exit here was accessible from later on in the stage, and you were meant to get to it through backtracking. You can actually see where the exit leads from the outside of the tree, so this was totally on me since I couldn't put 2 and 2 together after seeing this. I actually think this is super genius. Instead of just finding doors and going through them to find collectibles, you need to notice the orientation of the level and how it all connects. We can see the exit of the tree in the background. Keeping that in mind when we actually go inside the tree, we can understand that these 2 doors are connected. I think this was a great way to take advantage of the 3D environments in this game. It gives the visions actual depth on a different level besides them just being in 3D. Almost like they're real places with their own architecture. You can actually see how the placement of these doors makes sense in this perspective as opposed to just being flat doors you walk into. There's some mirror spirits here as well. The second one you find is pretty easy. You just collect them along the path they're on while avoiding projectiles coming in from the background. The first one is another puzzle you have to think about. Giant moos drop gems when you kill them. They're affected by the mirror spirit, but also disappear after a certain period of time. I fucked it up here, but this is what you're supposed to do. Again, it's not something that you can just rush. It's rewarding when you get all the gems you can in that time period. At the end of the vision, we run into a soldier from a kingdom called Jugpot. He tells us that because the water stopped flowing from Jugpot, we can't see Granny, giving us our next objective. Jugpot looks great. The cool colors make this area very relaxing. This is also an example of a water level in a platformer that doesn't make me want to tear my hair out. Water levels are notorious for being annoying, not just in platformers, but just in general. Water tends to change a lot of things when it's applied to gameplay. Like in Mario games, you're no longer bound to normal gravity, and now you also have to deal with new movement. In most Zelda games, 90% of the time you've got your boots on the ground. So then they introduce swimming, which is the complete opposite of having your boots on the ground. So in that example, how did they make it so that gameplay isn't completely changed when you're underwater? They give you an item that makes it so your boots are on the ground. In other ways, they'll just find ways to make traversing water as easy as possible. In Galaxy, Mario is able to pick up shells and use them to swim faster and easier, like a fucking sea bob. Zelda games usually give you the iron boots so you can just do what you were doing on land, but sometimes they'll get a bit more creative, like with the Zora mask and Majora's Mask. So how does Klonoa do its water level? By not having you be in the water at all, actually. This was a great call because we get all the beautiful aesthetics of a water level, but none of the fuckery that comes with it. The way Klonoa controls wouldn't make any sense underwater. If we put Klonoa in an underwater Mario level, for example, he loses a lot of what makes him fun to control. Swimming makes his double jump with enemies worthless as he can just swim as high as he wants, so the fun of platforming is gone. Movement would probably be slower, and throwing enemies would probably cause them to travel slower as well. So we'd basically be getting the same gameplay except slower, which it just doesn't make sense to downgrade your game for the sake of changing the pace a little bit. The best way to make Klonoa work underwater, in my opinion, would be to make an auto-scrolling level where you grab enemies that come at you and throw them at obstacles or switches in order to progress. Something like this roller coaster segment in the previous area, except movement is vertical along the x-axis and there's enemies to grab and throw. Maybe they could have used Klonoa's ring as a propelling device to control his speed better. This is all just my idea of how they could have done things if they had to put Klonoa underwater, but honestly it's definitely better the way it is now. This is a new idea for a platformer with new mechanics that hadn't really been done before by my knowledge, so it was a good idea to play it safe and keep Klonoa in an environment that's familiar and makes the best use of these mechanics. This level expands on the platforming a bit more with these moving bubble things that make you bounce off the side if you hit them. If you mess up a jump involving them, you can end up bouncing off the side and into a pit. This vision also introduces these rapids. They force you in one direction and you can slow down by pressing the opposite direction, and there's usually gems and enemies along the way. The last rapids in the stage actually differs between the original version and the Fantasy Reverie versions. In the original, the rapids end with this line of gems that you need to hover to get, and 3 gems at the end you need to jump and line yourself up for. The newer version has enemies you need to grab and use to double jump to get the gems at the end, with the gems you need to hover for completely removed. I think I actually prefer the newer version, as it requires you to think more on your feet than in the original. It also just feels more satisfying to pull off and is just the more stylish way to finish off the segment. We eventually find Carol, a resident of Jugpot who is imprisoned. We free her and agree to save her mom. Carol takes us to our next boss fight, Seedoff, who is the king of Jugpot, and Pamela, Carol's mom. Both have been turned evil by Ghadius and are the reason Forlock hasn't been receiving any water. This is a really fun fight, and it doesn't hold your hand like the last fight. Spiky balls are Spiked balls are can't. These spiky balls are constantly coming at you. I can't say it. So these things are constantly coming at you, and Pamela will jump at you from the center of the stage. The only thing you can grab is Seedoff. When you grab him, you can throw him at Pamela when she jumps at you. You can throw him while she's in the middle, but it's harder to line up since you've got these things coming at you. Joke is not here to tell you how to win, and the only grabbable enemy is Seedoff. There's no respawning moves for you to grab if you mess up a shot, so it's important to make your throws count or you'll have to wait on him again. You can grab him while he's on top of one of these things, but it's risky. There's a lot to pay attention to here. Pamela will cause bubbles to rain down on you, making another obstacle you have to avoid. This is a really engaging fight with the combination of potential damage coming at you from the sides and from above you. Beating this boss causes the king and Pamela to return to normal and reverse the water flow back to Forlock. Seedoff also tells us that Forlock's granny is in trouble because she has a lot of knowledge of the Moon Kingdom, which he suspects is the main target of Ghadius's plans. So we hitch a ride on Carol and return to the revitalized Forlock Forest. In the new and improved Forlock Forest, we have these boxes here that serve both as an obstacle blocking us from proceeding, as well as collectible containers. The Slenderman symbol here has appeared on other objects in previous visions, so it's clear that we have to hit these things with enemies. This level is pretty straightforward. Branching routes are mandatory to explore for getting through the stage. To advance, all you have to do is unlock doors and ride the gondolas. Something this vision does well is the collectibles. I mentioned the boxes already, but there's also these pink flower buds that are visible in the foreground and background. They bounce a little and stick out against the green scenery, so they're very noticeable. However, they do contain eggs and other goodies if you hit them with an enemy. This evolves the quest to find all the collectibles further, as we now have to experiment with things that seem off in order to find everything. This was explored a little bit before. Some eggs are invisible and you need to run into them first and make them appear before opening them. You can actually see their shadows on the ground before you interact with them, signaling that there's something there. Right after, there's this section here that's very clever as it takes advantage of your killer instinct. You can see here that there's this giant armored moo standing in the way of a switch we need to hit in order to activate the gondola. If you hit the moo once, it'll start moving, and if you hit it again, it'll die and drop gems. To get all the gems in the vision, you need to hit this switch without killing the giant moo, and then kill it after riding the gondola to the section it's in, as the gems it drops will disappear after a short period of time. Instinctively, you might might want to kill the giant moo to get a better shot of the switch, but do that and you've squandered your shot at getting the gems. I remembered I killed the giant moo the first time I got here and immediately facepalmed myself as soon as I understood what I had to do. This is a very simple puzzle, but I really appreciate how it uses your instinct to defeat the enemies you come across as a puzzle device. Vision.III starts a trend of more expansive levels. First, we've got this new jihad dog that explodes after it's been around long enough. They're mostly used to hit switches like this one here. They're also used later in the level to hit a timed switch, like using bombs on switches in Zelda. This level involves us traveling around this central pillar and turning on the mechanisms that operate the tower in order to get access to new areas. We can actually get to areas with gems in them that we're meant to reach after we complete a certain segment, but do that and you fail the Mirror Spirit challenge. This is like the last puzzle that was made around the idea of defeating enemies, except now the game is taking advantage of our greed and completionist mentality. Passing up gems seems crazy, especially if you want to get every single one, but you have to bite your tongue and remember where they are for later. This level also involves riskier jumps, something else that will become more prevalent as the game progresses. My favorite part in this level is this giant gear that we run around. I like how the bubble with the Phantomillion in it comes into view as we go around the back, and these musical switches you need to mess with in order to get the gear to start moving, to activate all the wooden machinery in the inside of the tower. At the top of the tower, we find Joka, who is about to torture Granny like the CIA and start a boss fight against Gelg Bohm. The way to hurt him is to attack him from above with the moves that jump in from the background. You have to use the springs in order to get enough height, as well as time your jumps well so you don't accidentally have him run into you. He has an attack where he jumps in the air and you need to get him to land close enough to his spring so that you can hit him. Timing this wrong can cost you some health. If you don't get him to land in a good enough position, you'll have to wait for him to jump again. He also has two different kinds of attacks with spike balls, or whatever the fuck these things are. The first one is small enough to jump over with the springs or with a double jump, but later on he'll use a gigantic one that you'll need to use both a double jump and a spring to avoid. He'll also move faster, making him harder to hit. Another great fight all around. Also follows this great trend of more difficult platforming we've been seeing. After saving Granny, she tells us that the moon pendant is the key to getting access to the Moon Kingdom, the place Ghadius needs to access in order to destroy the dream that makes up Phantomile, but it needs to be offered up at the Temple of the Sun first. Joka overhears Klonoa spill the beans about how his grandpa has the pendant, and now we have to race back to him before Joka blows up his house and makes it look like Jugpot did it. Granny shows us a shortcut so that way we can get back to Klonoa's grandfather faster. I really like this part here where you need to go through a hole in the wall to get some collectibles. I passed this hole the first time I played this level thinking it was just a decoration. There's a ledge here you can jump on and an enemy to grab that's meant to clue you in on the fact that it's a pathway. The fact that not every doorway looks like a door makes me feel like I'm actually exploring the level, or in this case like I'm actually entering some ruined area by taking advantage of the decay the buildings have gone through for who knows how many years. Klonoa isn't a hard game, but it's built in a way where I never feel like I'm just going through the motions whenever I enter a level like this. I'm still thinking about my movements and how to clear obstacles. I just always feel invested. It just goes to show that a game doesn't have to be challenging to be fun, you just need it to be engaging enough for the player. I also want to talk about these ships in the background. They look just like the ship Lafize crashed landed in at the beginning of the game, and we'll see later that Joka also has access to them. I noticed this when I was going over footage and it made me wonder about why they're here. We don't really get in-depth lore about the world or its kingdoms other than the fact that the world is born from forgotten dreams. Despite this, I like how they added this detail. It makes the level more interesting and turns it from a spooky ghost level to something a little bit more. This game doesn't have a massive storyline to it either. It's your average save the world from darkness kind of deal. I don't think this game needed a super deep story to it, but it never really drew me in the way I thought it would. I think it's fine for a game like this though. Klonoa is definitely more focused on its gameplay, which if I had to choose between a platformer with good gameplay or a platformer with a good story, I'm choosing the former almost every time. Like, people don't play Mario games because they're expecting some immaculate writing. They play Mario because you can do all these cool movements so you can forget about all your real life problems. I just wish we could have seen more from these characters. The vision after this one involves a lot of, I don't know, treadmill-like gameplay. First, there's these slopes we have to slide down. You can't rush through them or else you'll end up crashing into the moves you're following. After, we have more of these rapids with some collectibles along the way, which can be missed if you don't time your jumps right. After this segment, we wind up in a cave with these green boulders in the way. It's very apparent that you have to throw enemies at them to get them to break, but I also think it was a good idea to make them the same color as the gems, which they drop, in order to make them stick out from the environment and to encourage the player to interact with them in different ways. But of course you're gonna fucking throw something at it. It's how Klonoa solves all of his problems. I also think the flow between this vision version and the last works really well. We just traveled through some back alley shortcut and made our way back to familiar territory. Even though we haven't seen this particular part of it, we definitely know we've made it back home. The first few visions had us go through a similar mountainside and some caves, and now we're back here doing the same thing. We're back in a familiar looking area, but still have to traverse unfamiliar territory. After this, we have a boss fight against Palladium, another monster summoned by Joka. We're on this swinging bridge and have to use enemies on one end to hit one of his weak points when the bridge swings towards him. He can set up some pillars that can crash into us, and spawn some enemies that can only be defeated by using wind bullets to push them off the edge. This is a pretty easy fight. Hitting the boss with enemies is pretty easy since we're able to get right up to him. He has 8 spots on his body you can hit, but they're close enough together where you can hit 2 with one enemy. The real challenge comes from dodging obstacles, but it's easy to get used to. After the fight, we get a cutscene of Klonoa finding his grandpa before he passes away. I think we've been through enough of this story to the point where I can talk about the language in this game. The characters all speak what's known as Phantomilianese. The language itself is mostly gibberish with Japanese inspiration. Even though they're not saying real words most of the time, I can still understand the emotions being conveyed through it, as if it were an actual language. I can tell when a character is angry or is trailing off, for instance. You can also pick out when the characters say a name or how certain Phantomilian words or phrases will always mean the same word. This really makes the language feel almost legitimate. You can even find a dictionary on the Klonoa wiki that translates some of the more well-known words and phrases. If you know a few Japanese words, you might be able to pick out a few. Like when Klonoa calls his grandpa Jiji, which means old man in actual Japanese. Now, I'm just an ignorant American, so I'm not an expert on the Japanese language, but I'm pretty sure Jiji is a disrespectful way to refer to an elderly person, because that's what Jotaro calls Joseph in JoJo's, and he doesn't really appreciate that. So if I'm right, this also gives us a little insight into Klonoa's relationship with his grandpa. Maybe it's more polite when Klonoa says it, and he and his grandpa are close enough in a way that this could be insult as more of a cute nickname. The Wii remake of this game doesn't use this language and has actual voice acting, which is a big disappointment in my opinion.
Prepare altar in Temple of Sun, and with that, road will open. What's the Temple of the Sun?
Phantomilianese adds a lot of personality to this game and its characters. I really don't think Klonoa needed voice acting, especially with the older sounding voice he was given. Anyways, Grandpa is dead, and the pendant's been stolen. Klonoa doesn't have much time to ruminate on this though, because Pamela is here to take us to the Temple of the Sun, to stop Gattius from offering up the Moon Pendant to make the Moon Kingdom appear. The Temple of the Sun's gimmick is these 4 orbs we have to collect in order to open the door to the altar. These orbs can be collected in any order you want. This is definitely one of the longest visions in the game too. The difficulty also ramps up a bit here, especially when it comes to the mirror spirits. This one in particular probably has the smallest room for error in the whole game. When I say you can't stop moving, I mean you can't stop moving. You can land on this ledge after you get the ones up here, but the opening you have to move through to get to the last ones is so small that any amount of hesitation or delay can cause you to lose out on even 1 gem. The other is fairly simple in theory, but the execution has to be precise as well. The fact that you can choose any route to start start off with makes this a great change of pace. If you've beaten the game and are going for all the gems, you can choose what order you want to tackle each route, depending on how difficult you think each one is, or even strategize by taking into account the amount of tries you may have. It's just nice to be able to choose where you want to start and end in general. Each path feels like its own mini level. None of them feel the same and tend to focus on Klonoa's different abilities. Lots of variety here. This level also looks really nice. This place is in the sky, separated from the rest of Phantom Isle, so it makes sense for its presentation to be a bit foreign. The previous visions used a lot of cool colors. Not like radical cool, but like color temperature cool. Lots of blues and greens. Up here, the colors are warmer. This is the Temple of the Sun after all. The machinery is also a nice contrast. We've seen machines before in Forlock Forest, but that was all ropes and giant Looney Tune hammers that smack you around. The temple is more of a factory setting, even sporting rivers of lava. After opening the door to the altar, we learn that Gaudius is already ahead of us. In the following vision, we find the High Priest who tells us that Gaudius plans to use the Moon Kingdom, which uses dreams to give shapes to Phantom Isle, to turn Phantom Isle into a world of darkness. I think we've heard all this before actually, just more detail is being added. I think we know by now that Gaudius wants to destroy the world. Maybe some more backstory about him would have been nice. Like he already wants revenge on the people who imprisoned him. Maybe expand on that a little more. We learn later that he despises Phantom Isle for living in a world of dreams and ignoring nightmares, which is, that's fine. I think his motivations could have been more personal though. They could have given him a bit more depth while still keeping it simple. Like maybe he lived in the Moon Kingdom and learned of the forbidden powers of nightmares, and the other residents of the kingdom, not appreciating him dabbling in taboo powers, sealed him away before he got too powerful. Then, when he got out, he vowed revenge and decided to carry out his plan. Before we can confront Gaudius though, we have to go through this last part of the temple. The whole deal with this area is that it changes from day to night. When it changes to night, the enemies change and you're unable to grab them. There are also platforms that you're only able to jump on when it's day. You get as far as you can while it's day, collecting gems and throwing enemies at switches, and then when it turns night, waiting for it to turn day again so you can continue. At night, you'll have to dodge enemies as you wait for them to become grabbable again in the daytime. Sometimes you'll go inside the building you're moving around. The day-night mechanic doesn't affect anything in here and it feels like an entirely different level altogether, which I'm thankful for. If the whole level was this day-night thing, it would definitely overstay its welcome for me. By changing it up with these indoor segments, I can appreciate the mechanic more since it's not something I have to deal with for the entire level. This is also another pretty damn lengthy level. I would complain, but honestly this is great. I said before that this game only has about 12 visions. If they were all short like the earlier stages, it would have hurt this game a lot. Klonoa is really fun to control, so to have these lengthier levels near the end of the game where I can really try out my skills with the mechanics is totally okay in my book. All the visions are unique, and I had a blast playing through all of them. Even the ones that I thought were linear were still fun to play through. It never feels like Klonoa's moveset is underutilized. Each level really makes the most of what he's capable of. At the top of the tower we confront Gaudius, who reveals that Lafize is the key to the destruction he wants to cause. He teleports away and we're left to finally fight Joka himself. Joka moves around the center of the ring. We need to throw moves at him, which he can block with his hands that are orbiting around him. Now you might think having a bunch of moves to throw at a target would be lame, but that's where you'd be wrong. After some time passes, Joka will transform and change the time from day to night. His attacks become way harder to dodge, and the moves are now more of an obstacle since we can't grab them while it's night. To turn the time back to day, you have to step on all the tiles on the arena until they're all yellow. After which, Joka will go back to his other form where you can throw moves at him. The transformation works on a timer, not on how much damage he takes, so it becomes a frantic chase for moves before he turns everything back. This adds tension to the fight as you want to hit him as many times as possible before his transformation. This can cause you to take riskier shots at him, which can damage you, or cause you to have to go searching for moves again. I love the background of this fight. Sky backgrounds are my shit, and both the day and night versions are really well made. Taking down Joka feels amazing too. This guy fucking killed Klonoa's grandpa, and now we can finally hurt him directly, instead of him sending monsters to kill us like he's a Pokemon trainer. Look at this god tier read I got on him for my finishing blow. Despite my gamer sense, the Moon Kingdom appears anyway, in this really awesome CGI cutscene. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but CGI cutscenes like this being more scarce around this time really make story moments like this more impactful. The sky looks cataclysmic as the Moon Kingdom bursts from underneath the ground, and then we have Klonoa looking absolutely pissed, and I feel him, man. He just got done killing the guy who killed his grandpa, and now he has to save the rest of the world. He literally cannot catch a break. Pamela showing up to carry us to the Moon Kingdom makes it really hit home that we're on the last leg of our adventure. At the base of the Moon Kingdom, we get this moment that suggests Hupo might be hiding something from Klonoa. This may seem out of place right now, but believe me, it'll make sense later. These next two visions have what I believe to be the best tracks in the entire game. They're very relaxing and also feel a bit melancholy as we're approaching the end of the game. The colors in the Moon Kingdom capture the feeling of dreaming very well. I love the particles that fall off the platforms as you walk on them, and the falling stars in the background is a really nice touch. The first vision of the Moon Kingdom involves finding crystals to destroy some statues that block our path. We get to use this bomb dog for the first time in a while, which is always fun. This vision feels like a calm before the storm. It still has some tough mirror spirits, and the platforming can be tough sometimes, but I wouldn't say this is the hardest level in the game. The first thing that happens when we arrive in the Moon Kingdom's second vision is that it's revealed that Hupo is actually its prince. He's very clearly hiding stuff from Klonoa and says he promises to tell him what's up later, but Klonoa is too good of a friend to probe Hupo for answers. He's got a world to save. This vision has some extremely tight platforming where you are being pinched by two sets of moves and have to grab them as they're coming at you in order to advance. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're on these tiny platforms, so it encourages you to think while you are under a bit of pressure. Actually, I would say that most of this vision involves tight gameplay in general. These new boomerang guys actually trip me up from time to time, especially in this segment here where you have to grab them in order to keep moving, but you have to start all over if you miss a jump since they don't respawn unless you're at the bottom. There's also these rooms with switches in them where you have to activate all of them within a short period of time to get the door to open. This vision knows you're at the end of the game and expects you to act as such. All this time playing as Klonoa has brought you to this moment, and it really feels like the game is putting you to the test. At the end, we finally catch up to Gadius, who alludes to an idea that Klonoa is out of place in this world. When asked why he's doing all of this, he simply says that it's because he's tired of a world that rejects nightmares. Going back to what I said about the story, this moment feels a little underwhelming. We already know that he's doing this out of revenge, but he doesn't express that here. He even says that getting rid of a world that only likes good dreams is reason enough. Maybe he could do something out of character for him, like yell at Klonoa or have a big toothy evil grin while monologuing about how much he hates the people who imprisoned him, and they're all hypocrites for locking him away for wanting to expand his perceptions about dreams when all they care about are the good ones. He even talks about not caring that he's going to die if he succeeds since he's been abandoned by the world anyway. If this was touched on just a bit, I think it would really make this scene much more memorable before we engage in his boss fight. Just like the level leading up to him, Gadius's boss fight involves being precise. There are these portals that, if you touch them, send you to the top of the ring, where Gadius can unleash some attacks on you as you try to get yourself back on the inside. There are 3 phases to this fight. The first phase has us grabbing moves that are raining down along with some projectiles. Hitting Gadius isn't hard. He's a huge target, so missing him is going to be rare, if you can even miss him to begin with. Just like with Joka, the amount of times you can hit him per cycle varies depending on how quick you are to get moves and how many you're able to grab. You can easily get hit by the meteors or the portal if you try to grab something that's just a bit too out of reach for you though. The second phase has a limited number of moves for you to grab, and they also get harder to grab as you throw them at Gadius. Phase 3 has the moves trapped in this electric triangle that's thrown at you. It can only be deactivated after hitting one of the crystals making up the corners. It requires getting close up to the electrical barrier, making it something that you have to time and hit well. Overall, this boss fight wraps up this vision very nicely. I really applaud this game for making use of Klonoa's kit, as I never feel like I ever neglect any of the things he's capable of. Being one of the last, this vision makes the best use of that, in the vision itself and in this boss fight. We did it! We saved the day! Look, all our friends are here to thank us! Oh, fuck. Fuck. Okay, so we've got one thing left to do. This destroyer of worlds, Nahatome, has been born from the egg Lafize was being corrupted with nightmares in. Hupo tells Klonoa that Nahatome is apparently after Klonoa since he's this strange dream Gadius was talking about. But of course, there's no time to explain, we gotta get the fuck fuck in there. The first phase of Nahatum, which I am just now deciding to change the pronunciation of, involves us giving our allies enemies to load into their cannons. It's pretty— oh, fuck, I forgot to turn my fan off. Hold on. Okay. It's pretty easy, you just need to watch out for Nahatum's attacks. His attacks are super easy to dodge in this phase as they just involve jumping over things. He'll spawn 4 enemies, 3 with armor and 1 without. The shockwave attack can actually knock the armor off the enemies he spawns, meaning if you're fast enough, you can get more than 1 enemy into the cannon every wave of enemies he produces. This phase isn't much to write home about, to be honest. In the second phase, Nahatum eats us and we once again have to throw enemies at specific targets. More specifically, these 4 crystals that we can only hit while the platform we're on is positioned in a certain way. The enemies that show up can slide off the edge, so you gotta pick them up real quick before that happens. His eye beams are kinda hard to avoid at first, but as long as you pay attention to where you're landing and the direction he's moving, it's not hard to avoid at all. A 5th crystal appears after you destroy the first 4, and a 6th crystal will appear after that one, and they're actually mobile this time around. Nahatum attacks in the same way as before with his eye beams, so the challenge just comes from hitting the moving crystals. The third phase is similar to the first phase, except instead of passing the enemies forward, we need to pass them downwards. Nahatum also got a bit of a glow up, which I'm super into. It's the same deal as last time, but I'd argue even easier. Nahatum now uses this rainbow wave similar to Rongo Longo. It comes from the center and more waves appear as the fight goes on. It's not hard to dodge in any of these instances. You might get caught off guard though, as I don't think there's any indicator that he'll make more waves outside of the number of cannons you load, but all you have to do is time your jumps well and hover, the timing of which isn't tough to get down. He can also destroy the platforms you're on, which can delay putting enemies into the cannons, but if you're patient, you won't have any trouble and eventually fill all the cannons. It may not seem like I'm too enthusiastic about this fight. I don't think it's the best fight in the game, honestly, let alone compared to other platformers. Before this, we finished some visions that really tested our abilities, but here I feel like the game's taken some steps back. This game's difficulty curve was really steady until this point. Obtaining enemies for the cannons in the first phase is as simple as finding the one without armor and dodging the others until they lose their armor. The second phase is a bit tougher since only one enemy spawns at a time, and you sometimes have to chase it down, but you only have to worry about one attack, and dodging it becomes easy after a while. The third phase and the first phase are tied as the hardest phases for me. Is it a bad fight though? No, I wouldn't say it's straight up a bad fight, I just wish it was more difficult. At the end of the fight, Klonoa shoots Hupo into Nahatum to finally defeat him and save the day. There's this touching moment where Klonoa thinks Hupo is dead, but it's actually fine. They're all good. Klonoa says they're gonna be friends forever. How cool is that? The evil from the world is gone, and now they can play together like they did before. Okay, now I know why Nahatum wasn't that hard. They didn't want me to feel vulnerable when this shit happened. Despite what I may think about the story having untapped potential, this ending was still pretty powerful for what it's worth. It made me actually feel things and think of the implications of Hupo's actions. Hupo made Klonoa fake memories so that he would help save his Phantom Isle. That's a little fucked up, but it's so conflicting, because he did it to save his world, but he had to make Klonoa think that they were friends. He's also still devastated that Klonoa had to leave, and Klonoa also still wants to be friends with Hupo and stay in his Phantom Isle even though he knows the truth. This ending was kind of hinted at throughout the game, and I appreciate it not really coming out of nowhere. This cutscene of Klonoa having to leave, with Lafize singing in the background, is just really nice. I don't think I would like the ending as much if it weren't for this scene. The desperation of Klonoa holding onto the ring and Hupo trying to keep him in the world. I don't think it's the best way to describe this ending, but I think it's safe to say that it's kind of bittersweet. Klonoa and Hupo were able to save this Phantomile, but Klonoa still had to leave. The last shot of this cutscene is of a flower being reborn and Hupo smiling. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for people playing this for the first time when this game had just come out. Like, people didn't know where Klonoa was going. Like, he's going back to his Phantomile, but like, this shot is the last we see of him. I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though I don't think the story isn't that deep, this moment was still really impactful to me. Maybe I wasn't bawling my eyes out or anything, but it still got me thinking about the characters, the world, all this stuff that wasn't really mentioned. And to that end, if it gets me thinking like that and made me fucking like feel shit, then I would go ahead and say, yeah, this is a pretty good ending. But even after the credits roll, there's still some stuff I want to go over in this game. Beating the original PlayStation version of the game unlocks the map screen, and like I said before, you can see that all the gem totals are at 0. Going over the visions, you can see how many Phantomillions you have left to rescue. Rescuing all of them unlocks Baloo's Tower, the extra vision. If you're like me, and you're still looking for that last bit of endgame challenge that wasn't satiated by Nahatum, this should whet your appetite tenfold. Entering the vision, we meet Baloo, who tells us that he's going to confess his love to Lafize at the top of the tower. So now we gotta play Chris Hansen and hurry to the top. If you couldn't already guess, Baloo's Tower is the most challenging vision in the game by a wide margin. This is the ultimate test of your skills with this game. To make it even harder, Baloo's Tower has its own set of 150 gems for you to collect, which means its own mirror spirit challenges. Going into this for the first time, I knew this was going to be tough. Just entering the tower, you're met with a stack of extra lives. Seeing these lives all in one place like this really lets you know that you're in for it. I never got all the gems. In the Fantasy Reverie version, I got all the gems in every stage except for Baloo's Tower. Maybe one day I'll go back and try to get all of them, but I was satisfied completing this level without gathering all of them. Baloo's Tower starts out simple enough with some familiar platforming, but quickly ramps up its difficulty. This vision makes you use Klonoa in ways you wouldn't really think of in other visions. For example, I never noticed that these propeller enemies will dip lower depending on when you grab them while you're falling. If you grab them after falling a long distance, they'll float downwards before flying upwards, reducing the height you can reach with them. In order to get the most height out of them, you need to grab them before falling with the least amount of momentum possible. This makes for some pretty tense moments as you are over lava for most of this vision, meaning missing a grab can cause you to instantly lose a life if you're not careful enough. You'll sometimes even need to make sure you're not jumping too high, as seen in this segment here where if you hit the roof, you'll ricochet off. At the top of the tower, we find out that Lafize actually had things handled all by herself. We get to listen to this track from the music player and then, that's it. That's the end of the game. Klonoa deserves better. In addition to this game, there's the second game that came out on PlayStation 2, a game on the Wonder Swan, 2 games on GBA, and a remake of the first game on the Wii. There's also a volleyball game and an RPG that was never released outside of Japan. You would think that if they made a Klonoa volleyball game, then they were probably feeling like the series was doing well, but that's not the case. The series never really sold well, unfortunately, especially in North America. It released on popular systems like the PlayStation 2, Game Boy Advance, and Wii, but it could never truly break any kind of significant sales goal in the US. There's something about Klonoa that doesn't reach most of the North American audience. Maybe Klonoa was too cute for that generation of gamers. Maybe it had something to do with Klonoa's debut on the GPA releasing on a less than fortunate date in American history. One day, I hope we'll get to see more from Klonoa. I had a lot of fun with this one. There was never a dull moment, and I was engaged the whole way through. And who knows, maybe one day, Klonoa will finally have his day in the sun, and he won't be seen as that one character from that one game, but as an unsung hero who was never really appreciated to the extent he deserved in his day, who has not only gained a newfound respect from the people who missed out on his games when they first came out, but is also a tier 0 character in Smash Bros. 6 that fills the top 8 slots in every tournament. Look, a guy can dream, alright? See ya.